Alright, so I just shot a video about tomato blight, but now I'm going to shoot a little video about blossom end rot and the way I deal with blossom end rot. Well, blossom end rot can be caused by a number of situations, infrequent watering, and most of the time when you get blossom end rot, it's usually a pH problem in your soil. That's my interpretation of blossom end rot. For example, if the pH is going up and then down and then up and then down, it causes blossom end rot. That's my interpretation. Some people say, no, it's a calcium, it's this, it's that. What happens is your soil's pH becomes unstable. When your soil's pH becomes unstable and you get high fluctuations constantly in your soil, that's going to cause you blossom end rot, no matter how much lime or sugar or whatever you put in your soil to try to treat blossom end rot. You got to stabilize the pH in your soil. You should do it before you get that problem, but if you notice that it's too late, the plant is already fully grown, and you see blossom end rot, now you have to do something about it. So if that's the case and you end up with blossom end rot, the way I end up dealing with it, a lot of people tell you to use Tums, and you know, you add 4 tablets to a gallon of water or something and break them down. And generally what I do when I get blossom end rot is I add garden lime to my soil. You could add gypsum if you want. Now, I've never used gypsum in my soil. I'm a little afraid to use gypsum for a multitude of reasons, but you can add gypsum to add that calcium back to your soil. Basically, Tums are calcium carbonate, and the garden lime, which you see here, is basically like 70 or 80% calcium carbonate with all the other micronutrients in with it, so it's a bonus. The only difference is between this and, say, gypsum is this stuff will raise your pH in your soil. But it doesn't just raise your pH in your soil. What it does is it stabilizes the pH in your soil. Because without a stabilizer in your soil, your pH is going to go up and down, up and down, up and down. And I'll talk about that in a minute, why it does that. But the calcium carbonate stops that up and down stuff. It starts leveling it out. It might raise the pH of the soil, and your plants might show a little bit of being affected by it at first. But once the soil stabilizes, the plant will readjust, and the plant will, if it's not sick from other diseases, the plant will readjust and it'll adapt to that soil condition, because now the pH isn't going up and down anymore. It's stabilizing. The calcium carbonate acts as a buffer for your soil. So it's very important you understand it. That's why I use a lot of lime in my soils. Lime also sweetens your tomatoes too. If you get tomatoes and they're bitter, there's not enough calcium, there's not enough lime, you're getting too much acid, the soil's too acidic, it's going to make your vegetables taste very bitter. So you need a lot of lime. Just got to use your lime according to the way the package tells you to do it. You got to test your soil if you don't know how to do that. But what I do is I take garden lime and I spread it on the surface of the soil. This is after I get blossom end rot. It's going to take like 2 weeks before that eventually seeps down into the soil and starts to affect the plant in a positive way. But after a while, it will sink down and it will stop the blossom end rot. It takes time. Even if you use Tums, it takes time. It's not going to cure blossom end rot in one shot, because it's still calcium carbonate. It's got to break down. Water and everything's got to help break it down. Now, you can see here, I started getting blossom end rot on here. Now, that healed. That healed. In this particular case, it worked and it healed. But in some cases, it doesn't. And that usually means that the soil is so bad that the plant will never recover. The other thing you have to avoid doing with blossom end rot is a lot of times your water is actually the cause of blossom end rot. Like, I have a water of like 8.6 on the pH, which is very alkali to begin with. Now, me adding more alkali to it's probably not a good idea, but by me adding more alkali, it's bringing the pH up a little bit and it's stabilizing it. So when I do water it, if I do water it with the hose, I'm not going to create that up and down motion. And that's what a lot of people don't realize. When they're watering your plant, they're watering your plants with house water, and house water is usually very alkali. It's usually between 8 and 10. It's very, very alkali. And when you're watering your plants in your garden with very high alkali water, that's going to start throwing your pH out. And that's where you start having these problems with calcium deficiencies and stuff. If your pH is wrong in your soil, it's not going to take up calcium. Even if it was planted in one big container of calcium, it's not going to absorb it because that pH isn't right. So normally your outside soil is like 6.5. It could be anywhere between 5.5 and 6.5. And what happens is you're watering it with the hose, and you're bringing up the pH on it artificially for a moment. But that up and down stuff is what causes these problems. It also causes plant stress and diseases. That's why I try to water my plants with rainwater or pond water, because that water is generally going to be around 7 or lower. And not usually too much lower than 7. It's usually 7, maybe 7.1, 7.2, maybe 6.8. It's always somewhere around there. That won't fluctuate your soil because rainwater is generally neutral. So neutral water is not really going to cause that effect. It's when you're watering alkali water or acidic water. Like if you have acid rain, people burn a lot of coal where you live, you're going to get acid rain, you're going to have acidity problems. And that's why a lot of times you may not do good in your garden. Like I'm suffering a little here this year. A lot of my stuff is really suffering. It's probably because I live in a coal part of the country and everybody burns coal out here. And that causes what is known as acid rain. They burn the coal goes into the atmosphere, it becomes acidic, it goes on the trees, the leaves, the ground, and then when the spring comes, your soil's dropping. Your soil pH gets very low. These are some of the causes of acid rain. If you don't know about acid rain, look it up and learn about it. You might have that condition. The only way to know is to test your soil. All right, so not to get too far off on it, but that's what I do when I deal with blossom end rot. You have to understand why you're getting blossom end rot. Yeah, the soil is probably bad, but it may not necessarily be the soil being bad. It's just the pH is out. It can't stabilize, and then what happens is your plants suffer. Sometimes your root system is just rotting or it's infected. It might have nematodes. These things will all eventually cause blossom end rot. So I find that they're all associated. Usually when I get blossom end rot on something, it's usually not just the soil. It's a combination of things. But most of the time, if you can correct the pH problem in that soil, you'll find that the tomatoes will stop getting blossom end rot. Now, this particular plant, every single tomato on here got blossom end rot. I gave it lime. I did everything to it. And it still got blossom end rot. So that tells me there's something in the soil on this particular case more than just it being deficient in calcium. So there's something seriously wrong with the soil. I gave it a lot of lime, so some of it looks like it's self-corrected, like they stopped rotting on the vine. This one's real bad. I just got to, you see the mold? Yeah, then once they get that bad, you got to get them off of there. Like I need to leave 1 or 2 of these on here. You can see like it stopped. I stopped it, but it's still growing here. I'm not going to eat that one, but I need the seeds because I don't have seeds for this particular tomato anymore. And, you know, I stopped it over there too. So if you got blossom end rot, check your soil. Make sure if it's very alkali, they suggest you use gypsum. I've never used gypsum. Okay, you can use gypsum if you have already alkali soil. A gypsum will not raise the pH. It doesn't lower it, doesn't raise it. It just gives it pure calcium, and that's the end of it. With lime, on the other hand, lime will actually raise the pH. But it'll raise the pH in a way where it'll go up, and then it'll kind of start coming down a little, and it stabilizes. It locks it in at wherever it raises it to. So it's not going to go up and then break down eventually. It's going to lock it in. And that's what you want to do when you use stuff like lime. But just be careful on how much lime you add. Now, I do everything by eye. So I added lime to that by eye. And it seems like it's working okay. But the plants are generally sick because they got tomato wilt. So until I try to rectify the tomato wilt problem, I can't fully justify this plant being fixed from blossom end rot. But most of my other tomatoes are fine. I all gave them lime. They should all be okay. This is the only one that got blossom end rot. And it's just not happy in that pot. So, and another thing too, they tell you about the infrequent watering. My take to infrequent watering with Blossom End Rot is tomatoes are funny. If you overwater them, you got to be real careful. You can get a fungal disease in the root system very, very easily. If you underwater them, then the plants suffer and you get like this, plant stress, where they're underwatering. A lot of these I'm underwatering deliberately because I'm seeing wilt virus. And when you see wilt virus, if it's fungal, stop watering, because that'll slow the wilt virus from spreading, possibly even allowing the plant to self-correct. So if you see wilt virus, don't keep watering it, because that is only going to make it worse. You're better off letting the plant dry out till it's almost dead, because eventually that tomato wilt will eventually, hopefully, correct itself. Just try to water on a regular basis. If you got good soil, good drainage, you should be fine. Just make sure you try to maintain it. If you water it every morning, you know. If you water in the evening, you water at the same time every day. And don't overwater it. Don't flood it so you wash all the nutrients out of the soil. Just give it a light top watering, unless you see like the plants are wilting from being in the sun, and you got to make sure that you give them enough water. But don't overwater. It's a very, very delicate balance. It's not fun, I can tell you that. I see why everybody goes to hydroponics, is you don't have to deal with this stuff, you know. It's very easy to correct blossom end rot in hydroponics, whereas in soil, it could be 1,000 things wrong in your soil that's causing it. So, but at least in hydro, you don't generally get that. And if you do start seeing it, you can correct it by nutrients, because you're adding all your own nutrients anyway. What else about blossom end rot? What else causes it? So the main thing that you got to keep your eye on is soil pH, guys. You got to find your target range for the tomatoes. I forgot what your target range is on the pH offhand. I think it's like 6.5 or something, between 6.5 and 7.1 or something. There's a target. You'll want to try to adjust your soil till you get it in there. The best way to deal with the lime is when you got your soil, you get it in fall. Like if you know you're going to be needing, I don't know, 4 cubic yards of soil, get your soil in the fall and have it delivered in the fall and let it sit out over winter. You have to do that, guys. It's the best way to do it. And then add your nutrients in there, your rock dust, your lime, humic acid, your peat moss. Add it all in there, mix it, and let that whole mix sit over winter. The soil will mellow, and you'll get really, really good growing crops. You won't have to deal with the stuff that I'm dealing with. Unfortunately, I didn't do that, and I am really, really taking the beating this year. I don't know what else to say about blossom end rot. The other thing you can do is just pick the tomatoes off. There's not much you can do. If, like in this case, at this plant, normally I would have just ripped this plant out with the blossom end rot on there. I would have just ripped that whole plant down, but I don't have any more of those seeds. So I got to at least let some of those sick tomatoes make enough seeds so I can at least make an attempt to start growing them again next year. All right, so that's about it, guys. You know, if you have any questions or comments about blossom end rot and how you deal with it and your opinions on blossom end rot, just feel free to share in the comment section, so maybe I'll learn something, you know. But that's the way I deal with it. If you use the lime early in the season, you generally don't have a problem. When they're already planted and they're this big and you got to start adding lime, it's really too late. You really need to do it before you plant your tomatoes. So, all right, so don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.